Put yourself in position to win big on Kentucky Derby Day with the power of daily racing form. Visit shop.drf.com and get past performances, expert picks, betting strategies, clock reports, and more. Again, that's shop.drf.com.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here, taking a look at the big race on Saturday, the Run for the Roses. It is the Grade 1 Kentucky Derby, going the 1.25 mile distance for the 3-year-olds at Churchill Downs. And as always, 20 horse field signed on, including some also eligible entrants, and we do have to take note of them after what happened in this race last year. But Craig, this is a really fun race, wide open. I will note, as we throw up this graphic of the field, we are showing my morning line that I made for this race for daily racing form. So some slight differences that you'll notice between the track morning line. We'll talk about that as we go through the contenders. Craig, I had a really fun time handicapping this race. It's just one of the more wide open derbies that I can remember, and I think there are positive things to say about a lot of horses in this field.
Yeah, I mean, as a horse racing fan, of course, I always look forward to the Kentucky Derby, but this year it just seems like one of the best races to handicap I can remember in quite some time. We had to send our picks into DRF a little earlier in the week, and I think I narrowed it down to 9 horses, and I use that term narrowed very loosely here because it's a very tough race, and even I narrowed it down to 9. That doesn't mean some of the others would shock me either, but just a good, strong, competitive field, a lot of different angles, which I'm sure we're going to talk about with some of these horses.
Yeah, from a speed figure standpoint, there really aren't any standouts in this race. The top contenders are very closely grouped. I think it's widely believed that the number 15 Forte is going to be the favorite in this race. We'll see what price he is. I've got him at 7-2. If I had to do it over, I might actually go up a little bit to 4-1 or something like that, because it doesn't feel like anybody in this race is going to take an overwhelming level of support compared to some prior Kentucky Derbies that we've seen. So it does feel like a race where the money is supposed to be pretty spread around. And as I said, we should mention some of those also eligible entrants. There are 3 of them in this field, Craig. I think the horse that some people might get interested in if you drew into this race is the number 22 Mandarin Hero. He ran a nice race in the Santa Anita Derby last time, one of the Japanese contingent, but he would need 2 defections to draw into the field, and it doesn't sound like we've gotten any news suggesting that's going to happen just yet.
No, it sounds like we'll probably go with the 20 who were officially in the field to start with. You never know. Still got a little time left. But of those 3, Mandarin Hero is the one that would definitely draw the most interest, in my opinion.
Well, we're going to try to talk about as many of these horses as we can. We'll skip over a few of the long shots, but go through a lot of the contenders. Before we do that, though, let's check out the TimeformUS pace projector for this Kentucky Derby. And pace is one of the most debated topics about handicapping this race because there's no clear frontrunner signed on. A lot of horses that could potentially be forward, connections that might have intentions to be forward. But Craig, what the pace projector shows are the horses that have actually displayed some speed in their prior races. And I think that's important to note. Regardless of what the intentions are, you have to have a horse that's fast enough to be forward in this race. And some of those that have shown that ability include the Japanese runner, the number 17, Derma Sotagake.
Right, now that's one we added in manually based on his race in Dubai. We did the same thing last year and it worked out very well. And just to be clear, that had no influence on the numbers this year. It was strictly, I made the pace figures, did the same formulas I do for all the other horses. And that's just where Derma Sotagake wound up being placed right in the front. And it's not all that surprising. If you watch his UAE Derby, he showed high speed to get to the lead. If the fractions don't necessarily look quick to you, keep in mind that they don't use run up when they race in Maidan. So the race was a lot quicker than what we're used to seeing when we see a 24 or whatever the fraction happened to be. I don't remember it off the top of my head. And Confidence Game, who's shown in second, I know he came from off the pace in the Rebel, but that was a very fast pace. The pace he ran that day would put him up near the front if he were to do it against his field. And he is a horse who's shown speed in his other races.
Yeah, I know we tend to agree about this, Greg. I think there's a narrative out there that some believe the pace could be slow in this Derby. I tend to take the other view, that it looks so murky. I think a lot of connections are going to get it in their heads that they want to be aggressive. And horses like the number 2 Verifying, the number 4 Confidence Game, especially the number 7 Reincarnate, they have to go forward to have their best chance in this race. So I think we're going to see some jockeying for position up front. Even number 12, Jace's a Road, is a horse that a lot of people believe could be forward in this race, though he'd have to show the the kind of speed that we haven't seen out of him in some recent starts. Let's also check out the TimeformUS finish projector for this race. This a new feature in TimeformUS that has just launched on DRF.com. And Greg, this finish projector, just a visual representation of the TimeformUS power picks that you might be familiar with from the classic version of TimeformUS. This shows the relationships between the runners at the finish based on the algorithm that takes into account the speed figures and pace projector. And I think this is a great use of the finish projector because it's not just 1, 2, 3 selections. We see two horses that are pretty similar on the TimeformUS data, the number 10 Practical Move and the number 15 Forte.
Yeah, they've got them right together at the wire, and that kind of comes down to Practical Move has run the better speed figures when you compare him to Forte, but Forte has been more consistent, running fast all the way back into his 2-year-old year, including winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile.
Well, let's get to our opinions of these horses, and we'll go through the contenders as much as we can post-position order, beginning with the number 1 Hit Show. We'll take a look at his last race in the Wood Memorial, which also includes the number 19 Lord Miles, who is in this race as well. Lord Miles is the one just to Hit Show's outside. We saw Hit Show highlighted there. And Greg, these two got engaged in a bumping match through the lane. I'm not sure it really altered the outcome of the race, but you could see they're not really finishing at the end, just kind of grinding it out, and Hit Show is going to come up a little bit short here. Hit Show is a horse that has been popular with the bettors in prior starts. He's been favored every time out so far. He's not going to be the favorite here. He's going to be a much bigger price, and I think he's just a horse that's going to have to hope to save ground and maybe pick up the pieces riding the rail in this race.
I think there's some pluses and minuses with Hit Show. We can see his speed figures have been progressing every single time out until that last race. And I do think you can give him some excuses. He lost ground. There was the bumping in the stretch. I would fully expect him, if he runs his race, to run better than that 112 we saw in the Withers 2 starts back. That said, the Wood just was not a very good race. The horse that was third, Dreamlike, he's still a maiden, I believe. He was definitely a maiden when he ran that day, and he was right there on the wire with him. So it's going to take a pretty big jump for Hit Show to get there. He does throw an inside post. I know some people don't like the inside. For a horse with his running style, I'm fine with it. It makes it easy for him to get to the rail, save ground on the turns. He's going to have to work out a trip, but we've seen before the rail can open up in the Derby as horses get tired and begin to drift. And he's a horse I would give a look in here.
Yeah, I agree about that. The number 2 is Verifying. He is coming out of a second place finish in the Bluegrass last time, a race we'll talk more about in just a little bit. And Craig, he's a horse that also has been heading in the right direction. His speed figures have been rising this year. Had a tough trip in the Rebel 2 back when he was sort of stuck in behind some tyrant runners at the top of the stretch before ultimately shaking free too late that day. I thought he got a great trip in the Bluegrass last time and just couldn't quite capitalize on it. As you see the pace figures of that race, they're very even. The pace mostly held together, and he just couldn't hold off Tapit Trice. So I worry about him getting better with the extra furlong here.
Yeah, I think the distance is an issue. I also don't think he got the best of the post draw. Drawing near the inside like this for a horse with his speed means he's going to have to go. He's going to have a target on his back as they head into that first turn. I think a lot of the other horses are going to be watching to see what he does, maybe try to take over in front of him. And I just worry. I don't think he's going to get the best of journeys from inside.
The number 3 is Two Fills, a horse coming off one of the best TimeformUS speed figures of anybody in this field when he earned that 120 in the Jeff Ruby Stakes last time. Now, as you can see from that blue color coding in the TimeformUS PPs, that was a race on the synthetic surface at Turfway, so he's going to have to transfer that form back to the dirt. I will say, though, Craig, even though this horse's prior dirt speed figures look a notch below that synthetic number from last time, he had been slightly against the race flow in both the Lecomte and Risen Star races that were dominated by closers, and he took over at the top of the stretch on each occasion and got a little leg weary late. Maybe he's just a horse that's really heading in the right direction and was underrated coming into that Jeff Ruby.
Yeah, I certainly think that's a possibility. And it's not like he just won the Jeff Ruby. He destroyed that field, winning by over 5 lengths. There's a pretty good turf horse in there, Major Dude, who ran second. It was a strong field. So there's some question marks because of the surface. You do have to wonder if that's what caused the increase. But I tend to agree with you that his speed figures were a little underrated those last 2 races. He made some early moves in the hot paces, got a little tired late. So, he's definitely a contender for me. He was one of the ones I mentioned in the beginning.
And we'll talk about this more later, but I think that Risen Star is more of a key race for this Kentucky Derby than maybe we gave it credit for at the time. And Two Phil's just has that kind of running style that works in the Derby. He makes that far turn move, is in the mix at the top of the stretch of his races. And really, if you're able to get through the traffic and be in the mix at the quarter pole of the Derby, you tend to have a shot at the end. The number 4 is Confidence Game. Let's take a look at his last race, which came all the way back in late February. This was the Rebel Stakes, 70 days ago. So we haven't seen Confidence Game in action in 10 weeks now. He looked good this day, Craig. He did get the right kind of trip, staying outside, making that move in a race where some horses that were getting inside trips arguably had a little more traffic trouble. But he does finish up this race nicely, earned a decent speed figure. You just have to ask the question, is he a horse that's a sloppy track freak? Where has he been in the last 10 weeks? And what do we expect from him off the layoff?
Yeah, I am a little negative on this horse. I don't like the 10-week layoff. It wasn't by design. According to his trainer, he just came out of that race exhausted, basically. And I'm not sure how he's going to be ready for what's probably, and I wouldn't even say probably, what is the toughest race we run in this country year in and year out. It's grueling. And as you mentioned, there's also the question, did he just love the slop? And even if it wasn't the slop, he had a perfect trip that day. He sat fairly close to a hot pace, but was able to work out a clear trip. The horses that finished in behind him haven't done a whole lot since then. Rev Route 1 won a race off of the Derby Trail at Oaklawn, but this horse isn't for me. I just can't get into the 10-week layoff and think he's going to be ready to run his best on Saturday.
He's been training well, looking very fresh in the morning, so that could be an indicator that he might show speed in this race. The number 5 is Tapit Trice, and let's take a look at the Bluegrass Stakes. We already mentioned Verifying coming out of the race, and here is Tapit Trice running down Verifying in the stretch. And Craig, I think the positives from this Bluegrass for Tapit Trice are that even though he broke a little slowly again, Luis Saez was able to get him into the race much sooner around that clubhouse turn. By the time they got onto the backstretch, he had already made up a lot of the ground that he had lost at the start and was in position to make this winning move in the stretch. You could see him really stretching out his stride across the wire here. Feels like a horse that's going to relish every bit of this 10 furlongs, just has to find a way to work out a trip in this 20-horse field.
Yeah, it's tricky with Tapit Trice. There's definitely negatives and positives, like a lot of the horses we're going to talk about. I did like the positive that at Keeneland, he was able to get into the race quicker. Of course, that was partly because of his rider, Luis Saez, was able to get him moving, energize him. But there is a concern of how he gets out of the gate. The one thing I think is the big positive for Tapit Trice is he just gobbles up ground in the stretch. And of all the horses in a 20-horse field, he is the one I'm confident will just be flying in the stretch. It's just the big question is, where is he going to launch that run from? If he does it from 20th, he's going to be in trouble. If he does it from 10th, he could very well win.
Let's move on to another Todd Pletcher trainee. The number 6 is Kings Barnes, and he is undefeated coming into this race off 3 victories in his career. Was an impressive winner last time in the Louisiana Derby. Obviously won that race quite well by 3.5 lengths. The problem is, Craig, I don't think the Louisiana Derby was the strongest race overall, and you see all those blue color-coded TimeformUS pace figures splashed across his PPs last time. He really had a favorable pace setup in that race.
He did, and he didn't run particularly fast, obviously, looking at those speed figures. Now, the pace was so slow that we had to give it a bit of an upgrade. You can see the raw final time was a 1:03. he could have run faster, I would say, if he was persevered with. We saw him run that same 105 when he won the allowance race at Tampa. It's just a matter of how much faster. He's a horse who's had great trips every single time out against inferior competition, and he's just not for me in this spot. I think he's going to take too much money. He's 12-1 on the morning line. Given that undefeated record, I'm not sure he won't even be lower than that.
Yeah, I think it might drift up a little bit. I just don't see a lot of people liking this horse, but I don't like him either, Craig. I think we pretty much agree on King's Bards. The number 7 is Reincarnate, another horse that could show speed in this race, especially with John Velasquez aboard. And John Velasquez is a rider who has had a lot of success in the Kentucky Derby with horses showing speed. I think most immediately of Medina Spirit, who did cross the wire first in the Kentucky Derby. And Medina Spirit was a horse that had PPs that looked somewhat similar to Reincarnate, having lost a few of the preps, but run decent races in them. I mean, Reincarnate ran pretty well in that Rebel 2-back when he was off to an awkward start, just was a little sluggish in the early stages, had some trouble in upper stretch, but was finishing well to be third. I was just left a little cold by Reincarnate's Arkansas Derby last time, Greg, where I didn't think he had an excuse.
Yeah, he was kind of the wise guy horse in that Arkansas Derby. And I say that he did have a tough trip in the Rebel, and I thought he ran well. The problem for me was he basically ran the same race when he got back to his more favored up front type position. Angel of Empire simply blew by him in the stretch. And I don't see it. I do think he will go for the lead from his sort of middle inside post. John Velasquez is going to be aggressive with him, I would think. I just don't think he has the horse to win this race.
The number 8 is Mage, another lightly raced runner in this field, sort of like King's Barnes, just 3 prior starts under his belt. Craig, this horse is definitely good. He showed it in his career debut when he was an impressive winner. He's had some trouble at the gate in his last 2 starts, particularly last time in the Florida Derby when he was off about a length slowly and got badly shuffled back in the early stages, had to launch a run from last place, and he did put an impressive run going from last to first in the span of about 2 furlongs and had a right to get run down by Forte at the very end. He's just another horse, Craig, where I worry about those gate problems in a 20-horse field.
He's a really talented horse. As you said, he made that move in 2 furlongs. That was really eye-catching. He looked like a winner for a lot of the race until you got to the last furlong when Forte was able to run him down. I just really worry about his gait issues and also his lack of experience. It's quite a big jump coming into this race in just your 4th career start. We very rarely see it succeed. We've seen Todd Pletcher send out a couple races with very similar performances. Oh, actually, I'm talking about the wrong horse. But we've seen horses like this before come in with just late running lines, lack of experience, and I've kind of learned over the years that they're best avoided, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the point is it's tough for these very lightly raced horses without the experience and seasoning to take a step forward in a race like the Kentucky Derby, and horses like Mage and King's Barnes would have to do that. Let's discuss a couple of the California-based contenders, the number 9 Skinner and the number 10 Practical Move, and we'll take a look at them competing last time out in the Santa Anita Derby. And Practical Move got his usual good trip in this race. He's the kind of horse that tends to make his own good trips, possessing that tactical speed and able to make that far turn move. It does get close at the end, and he has to battle back inside of Mandarin Hero, who we talked about as being one of the also eligibles in this race. The one that's closing on the outside is Skinner, though you could see he's stalling a little bit at the end of this race after making a wide far turn move into contention. These 3 hit the wire together, Craig. We'll take a look at Skinner's PPs first. I think the positives are his speed figures trending in the right direction. That 119 from last time, one of the fastest numbers in this field, and if this pace does heat up, he's one that can close at the end.
Yeah, Skinner, he closes nice. He did lose some ground in that race. His speed figures are improving. He's one that I think there's a lot to like. My biggest concern with him is he does seem to have a little bit of hang in him. He certainly has the breeding to go longer, but when I watch his races, I wonder. But he will be closing in the stretch. He's a horse that I think you have to take pretty seriously. I was glad that he got in the field because he is a contender, I think. It's just a question, do you think the mile and a quarter is really what he wants, and what kind of trips he going to be able to work out with his closing style?
Yeah, we didn't mention this on the pace projector, but he is the horse that has the best late pace rating in the field in TimeformUS if things come apart late. The number 10, Practical Move, Craig, he's the horse that beat Skinner last time out in that Santa Anita Derby. And like I was saying in that replay, he made his own good trip. He's a horse that tends to get very good trips. Tough to work out a perfect trip in the Derby, especially for a horse that can sometimes take a stutter step out of the starting gate. He's going to need to break cleanly and really get into the right rhythm in mid-pack.
Yeah, he has those two good speed figures last two times out, and I think the speed figures are legitimate. California races have been a little tougher to make because they're kind of isolated. We haven't had a lot of horses shipping out this year to run in other races, but everything points to the speed figures being solid in my eyes. It's just a matter of how he earned them. He's gotten perfect trips. He saved all the ground, and I think that may have inflated him a little bit. He's a good horse. I expect him to run well. I'm a little skeptical that he's going to be able to have everything go his way once again.
We'll skip over Disarm and Jace's Road. Neither of us are too interested in them. I know Disarm has generated some buzz this week due to the workouts. Jace's Road may be a pace factor in this race, but let's move on to the number 13, Sun Thunder. And I just want to briefly mention this horse, Craig. He's going to be a big price in this race. I know he looks somewhat inferior on speed figures, but I do think that Risen Star 3-back has proven to be a good race, and he ran well that day, albeit with a good trip. Hasn't gotten the best of trips in his last two preps, obviously against that slow pace in the Louisiana Derby. And then last time, maybe they weren't really serious about winning that race because he just needed some points to get into the Kentucky Derby. But again, he was a little behind the 8-ball towards the inside and an outside flow race. So there are some things to like about Sun Thunder, maybe not on the win end, but perhaps underneath.
Yeah, these horses like him with good late pace ratings, he's the second best in the field behind Skinner. They tend to find their way into the superfectas and inflate those prices a bit, sometimes a trifecta. So he's not a horse I'm going to totally dismiss for the reasons you mentioned. That Louisiana Derby, he had no shot given that pace. That was just an absolute crawl on the front end. Had some traffic troubles in the last time. And like you said, I don't know that he was fully cranked up for that one. He got in the race where they wanted, so I think he'll be picking off some horses in the stretch.
Let's move on to the number 14, Angel of Empire. We'll take a look at his last prep victory in the Arkansas Derby. And this was one of the more impressive prep wins that we saw, Craig, as he made the sweeping move around the far turn, started it pretty early, just after the half-mile pole, marching wide into contention on the far turn. And you can see once he gets asked to go by Flavien Prat in the stretch, he shifts over and just puts this field away pretty impressively, striding through the wire powerfully. Definitely the kind of final prep that you want to see out of a horse that's moving on to the Kentucky Derby, certainly suggesting that at a distance is not going to be a problem for him. And Craig, I've really evolved on this horse over the course of the Derby trail. Wasn't a big fan of him at first, but he had put forth a sneaky good effort in the Smarty Jones 3-back and then 2-back in that Risen Star. That was a 14-horse field going a mile and 3/16, sort of a trial experience for some of these Derby contenders to deal with a large field with traffic, and he handled it with aplomb, took another step forward last time. This is a horse that's just moving in the right direction.
Yeah, you can see his speed figures. He's improved every single time out, and not just small improvements. Every one has been a pretty big jump. That's going to have to end sometime, but if he takes another one of those jumps into the 120s here, he's going to be one of the horses to beat, if not the horse to beat. He's just been running races, just running powerfully. As you said, he passed everybody last time and just kept running. Nobody was gaining at the end. Yeah, I think you do have to question a little bit the competition he beat last time. King's Russell is on the AE list. Reincarnate, we've already talked about. He's going to be a very big price in here, but he did what he had to do, and he did it easily.
Yeah, and he's able to make that long, sustained run, which I think is a big strength in a race like the Kentucky Derby, where sometimes horses have to make multiple moves to be successful. The number 15 is Forte. Let's take a look at his last prep victory in the Florida Derby. And this race, Craig, got some mixed reviews. We already talked about Mage. He's the one who's leading the field into the stretch on the outside, just ahead of Forte. He made that big premature move on the far turn. Forte briefly looked like he was in deep water in top stretch, but you could see he starts to stride in the late stages and is able to wear down the tiring Mage at the very end of this race. Forte got the job done, did not take a step forward from a speed figure standpoint, actually a slight step backwards. And I think that's the concern with Forte. Is he just not moving forward at this point in his 3-year-old season?
No, you can see what I talked about, how he had those figures as a 2-year-old in 2 races, both of them at Keeneland, which kind of led to him being shown right there at the tire near the top in the power picks. I have concerns that he hasn't progressed. I fully expect that he's going to run a good race on Saturday. I just wonder if that race is good enough, given that he hasn't really developed and improved those numbers. So for me, at a short price, he's the kind of horse that I want to take a shot against.
Yeah, I agree. He's reliable. He shows up every time, but I'm just not sure that he's the horse that's going to take the step forward in this Kentucky Derby. And I do think the winner of this year's Kentucky Derby is going to have to take a step forward. The number 16, Race Kane, we'll skip over him. He's a big long shot in this race. Let's check out the number 17, Derma Sotagake, and his last victory in the UAE Derby over at Meydan in Dubai. And there's an argument, Craig, that this was the most impressive prep race of all, because you could see some big gaps between the top finishers at the wire here. I'll let you talk a little more about the speed figure for this race, or the potential speed figure for this race, just based on the raw times. But clearly this horse was visually impressive, winning on the front end. And if you've watched his prior races in Japan or Saudi Arabia, he's not a horse that needs the lead to be successful.
Yeah, this was an impressive performance. We've seen races that looked impressive before in Meydan. It has not translated to any success whatsoever when they come to Kentucky. But this race was different, in my opinion. When you look at the times between this and the World Cup, you can do that going back a very long time. And it just kind of shows this may have been the best UAE Derby we've ever seen. We don't do official speed figures for Meydan. We use the Timeform ratings. If I was making a speed figure based on the clock, it would have been in the 120s, probably right in the low 120s, putting him right there with practical move, maybe even a little quicker. He's got good tactical speed, but as you mentioned, if you watch some of the other replays, he's also a horse who's come from off the pace. So I think he's a very serious contender in here. If he ships well, which by all reports he's been working pretty well, in my opinion. So he's one I think you have to take seriously.
Yeah, I know some American race watchers have been a little turned off by his quirky behavior in the morning, but when you watch his replays, he's all business in the afternoon, and he is a major contender in this Kentucky Derby. And the 3 outside drawn runners, Craig, all big prices. We mentioned Lord Miles, Rocket Cat, I know, as a horse that would have to improve, and Continuar, the other Japanese runner, just seems like a big price in this race that's been easily handled by Derma Sotagake. So let's move on to our top picks as we throw up our selections for this Kentucky Derby. And I'm happy to see some different numbers on the board here, because it's that kind of race where you could go in many different directions. So I'm not surprised that we have some difference of opinion, though I don't mind your top pick at all, the number 17, Derma Sotagake. I think he is a major player in this race.
Yeah, I think at some point, and probably sooner rather than later, a Japanese horse is going to win the Kentucky Derby. They've been winning big races all over the world, and I'd rather take a shot now before everybody else jumps on board. Maybe he won't ship well, but he just has too much pointing for him to me. The big speed figure, the good tactical speed. I think the 17 post is fine. So I went with him as my top pick. I think Tapit Trice is going to run well. I fully acknowledge he has to work out a good trip, but the way he gobbles up ground in a race like the Kentucky Derby, where a lot of horses are going to be going the wrong direction, I think he's going to be a strong contender as well.
Yeah, I've got Derma Sotagake in there. I put the number 14, Angel of Empire, on top. I just really like his progression. I've just really come around to this horse in the past couple of months and think the 10 furlongs will be perfect for him. And just feels like one that is not going to be the favorite, and I think has a really strong chance to win this race. I also want to use the number 3, Two Fills, if he's anywhere close to the morning line price, somewhere in that 11, 12, even 15-1 range. He's a horse that I think is going to get the right kind of trip in this Derby and might be heading in the right direction. So many ways to go in a wide open edition of the Kentucky Derby on Saturday at Churchill Downs. I wish all of you luck with your Kentucky Derby wagers and picks on Saturday. Thanks for tuning in.